Speaking of saying it as it is, you, my friend, were a media darling, but now you're a media star. What's it like being a media star on 60 Minutes?
Well, Jim, what you're talking about is the season premiere of 60 Minutes, which, as we're recording here, just aired on Sunday, which had a South China Sea segment, as you know, and it was a fascinating experience. So 60 Minutes actually has wanted to do this segment on the South China Sea for almost a year. Well, that's when they first contacted me to try to pitch an idea that they had. And the trick is they really wanted to get out on a mission, right? And of course, a year ago, the missions were all to Second Thomas Shoal, and they were settling into almost a predictable rhythm of they would go out, the Coast Guard ships would, and the supply ship would get water cannoned. There would be some bumping and ramming and blocking, and then everybody would go back, and maybe the ship would be resupplied, and maybe it wouldn't. But it was all very exciting, and there were a lot of Filipino journalists going on those missions. And so 60 Minutes wanted to do a story on this. And so now, being, with my sea light hat on and being a maritime transparency advocate, I was interested in this because I wanted Americans to know what was happening in the South China Sea. So this was interesting to me. And so I did a lot of work behind the scenes with them, trying to help them set it up. The trick turned out to be that, these kinds of missions, first of all, 60 Minutes is a major production. It's not like, say, CNN or someone who shows up with a journalist and a cameraman and they go out and they film, right? This is an entire production crew, and to send them somewhere is very expensive. And if they don't get the right circumstance, it's not, they can't just do that and not get the right, if the mission doesn't go, or they don't get to go on it, or something else happens, then they have lost a whole bunch of money trying to put together something that never happens. And they can't respond sort of, they can't get a call on Thursday and say, be here Sunday. That just doesn't work that way with a production that large. So as we sort of looked at various missions going forward, and there was these long conversations about which ones they could get on, the risk for 60 Minutes was very high that they commit a bunch of money to it and it didn't happen. And of course, they've also got a production schedule and all these things. So by the time we got into early this year, a lot of the effort was kind of dying down because it just hadn't come together. And I think they were just sort of like, is this ever going to happen? Because it just, the weather would intervene or other factors. And so then in the summertime, I was contacted again, and they said, look, we're going to try to give this one last try. And by that time, there was this kind of a truce at Second Thomas Shoal, which is still there to this day. And so, we had a discussion about Sabina Shoal, where things seemed to be moving. And so they began to, have conversations with the Philippine Coast Guard, the Philippine government, and, others to try to figure out whether they could work this out. And so finally, the whole thing comes together in August. Now, I was not on the mission. Their crew was on the mission with the Philippine Coast Guard. And so what my job at that point was to show up in this, large hotel room that they had reserved with all their camera equipment and everything, and sit for 3.5 hours and record. And if you've seen the episode, I may have, 45 seconds of airtime. So, there were a lot of questions, and they would go through and they'd be, at the end, they'd be like, okay, so should we re-ask any of these questions? Did we get what we wanted? Can you ask number 68 again? I'm thinking, 68, good grief. And so, and the whole time I'm under this huge bright light because the lighting is very important. The way that 60 Minutes does things is just different. And of course, you and I, who grew up watching, Steve Croft and Morley Safer and all these, Andy Rooney and all these guys, and Leslie Stahl doing 60 Minutes, know that just the sense of where you are, the way they blur the background, the way they do all of these things is just unique. And so, kind of being in there and sort of, actually, I had to constantly be wiping sweat off my brow because these lights were so hot. but I mean, they were great professionals. They were really interesting to work with. It was a lot of work. And I've definitely got a lot of messages since it happened. People I haven't talked to in ages, who's like, hey, I saw you on TV. Because of course it reaches a lot of people. And, Sea Light is actually getting some inquiries from people who are either interested in donating or helping or finding out more, so that's been a boon for us. But altogether, it was just a very unique experience.
Well, it was a really good episode of 60 Minutes, regardless of whether you were on there or not, Ray. But the scenes of the Chinese ship ramming the Philippine Coast Guard vessel and reaction and the fear you could see in the eyes of the Philippine crewmen, very, very effective.
Yeah.
And your 45 seconds was brilliant.
It better have been.
Just enough.
I do think that if 60 Minutes had one request from their production standpoint, it would have been nice if the China Coast Guard ship had not rammed the Philippine Coast Guard ship while they were sleeping, right? It would have been nice if they would have been up and filming when that happened. So that probably didn't quite happen. So they had to actually go ahead and reconstruct that from cell phone cameras and other things later on. So no, it was fascinating.
It was good.
Anyway,
I look forward to the movie version with, you said George Clooney's going to play you, right?
Actually, it's going to be Mr. Bean.
Yeah. I was one or the other.
All right. Well, once again, I'm Ray, and that's Jim. Ian is our producer. By the way, Ian's high-quality graphics describing major geopolitical events and military events keep popping up, Jim. They're not only in media reporting now, but we're now seeing them in these, expert briefings or senior leader briefings from Washington and Manila and other places.